presentations. So first, let's go to the next slide, please. I just want to welcome Katrina Palen. She is a staff ML platform engineer at Stash. And obviously, with ML platform engineering, the interests NLP and data and feature engineering makes a lot of sense, but also finance, food, and gaming. I think really great topics. So Katrina, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself, and let us know, what your experience with Flyte was and what you're doing at Stash. So we're looking forward to your presentation today. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Katrina Palen. At Stash right now. Should I share my screen? Should I?
We can actually, however you want to do it, share your screen, or we can move it for you.
Yeah, yeah, we can go ahead. And if you have the slides, you can do it. Or here, I got it.
You got it. Okay, cool. Out of the way.
All right. Everyone can see my screen now?
Yeah.
Great. Oops, sorry about that. All right, so yeah, so today I want to talk a little bit about how we're using Flyte at Stash. And so I'll take a minute right now just to talk about Stash. So what is Stash? So Stash is the investing and banking app that empowers everyday Americans to invest and build wealth. And so what we allow our customers to do on our platform, we allow them to invest, bank, and learn. So we do cover all of these different aspects on our platform. You can find us on web as well as on mobile. And, we provide these tools for everybody's wealth building journey. And that's kind of what the customer sees on every day. But for the ML platform team, sort of on the back end, what are we doing? We're providing tools for modelers and researchers so that we can better fulfill our mission and our fiduciary duty to our customers. So we focus on keeping the platform first and foremost safe from fraudulent activity and preventing bad actors from impacting the system. And so I'll talk a little bit about how we came to Flyte. So as a ML team, we were thinking about okay, well, why do we need a new orchestration tool? And so a lot of what we were working with at the time was a little bit of a sort of just homegrown process, right? With any sort of startup, you kind of have, you do whatever works at the time. And so, one of the things that we were trying to look for is if we were able to, we want to reduce our time to market by standardizing our processes across all of the researchers and machine learning algorithms developers. We also want to, because we are a fintech company, we want to provide transparency and traceability for all of our models. And so one of the things when you start to get, a lot of models into production, especially as a finance company, you sort of have this obligation to be able to track models so that when decisions happen, right, when we say in a certain activity, we identify it maybe as like a fraudulent activity, we have a duty to be able to say, hey, this is the model, this is the data set that produced this prediction. And we should be able to do that throughout every single version and every single execution of prediction, as well as for data processing for our data sets. And then we also want to be able to give the data scientists and researchers this flexibility without bogging them down with DevOps, right? So in the very beginning of a startup, it's very typical that, you kind of just do whatever it takes to get things shipped out. And sometimes that means, data scientists are like learning infrastructure. But as we're trying to scale our team, we want to do less and less of that. And then finally, we want to just optimize the model execution time and as well as our compute costs, right? Because as more and more customers coming onto our platform, we want lower latency, and we also want it to be cheaper with every single prediction, every single training run. And so when we were going through this process, we wanted to evaluate different platforms. So this work started in April this year. So this is actually very new still to our organization. And so, we went through our evaluation process and we started implementing Flyte just a few months later in June. So what are the things that we looked at? We're currently on Airflow for a lot of our feature engineering. So we were thinking, okay, well, what if we stay on Airflow? What if we rewrite, our model training so that it works a little bit better in Airflow? What if we use Kubeflow? What if we use Prefect? And so these are the other platforms that we were kind of thinking about. And the things that we sort of considered while we were evaluating our different options was, first and foremost, we want all of the configuration to be in code. We want it to be observable, easy to debug, especially as we're working with many researchers and different styles of coding, with notebooks and different levels of familiarity with structuring, even just testable code. We want to make the writing a workflow for people's training jobs pleasant and straightforward, right? So I think that this is a big deal because if it's not simple and easy, people aren't going to adopt the technology, right? So this one was a really big one for us. And then, like I mentioned before, we want our workflows to be versioned and maintainable as we're going through this life cycle and evolution of models, V1, V2, V1.5, whatever it be. And then finally, as a finance company, we also want to make sure that the system and our data is secure, right? Because sometimes we're working with sensitive data. It's really important for us to be able to continuously monitor and ensure the security of our system and as well as our data. So we finally decided to move to Flyte, right? And there were a couple of different stages here. So we had to kind of decide on how we were going to approach this because we already had existing workflows in Airflow. So the first, of course, we set up Flyte. And one of the unique things for our setup, and I'll talk about this in a more detail later, but we're on self-managed Kubernetes. And then the second stage, the second part of the first stage was also configuring Spark on Kubernetes, because we want to move from what our existing Airflow jobs, which were a combination of Airflow and EMR. And now we want to be on Flyte and Spark on Kubernetes. So that was a big portion of the initial sort of setup for Flyte and our migration. So sort of what I call stage 2, we wrote some Spark tasks to just abstract specific Spark configurations away from modelers. So we want to be able to give them like the Flyte Spark task, but then put an additional layer of abstraction there just to kind of hide away some of the Spark settings where that we were required to set that we don't want them to kind of think about. And then finally there, we have to rewrite those existing Airflow workflows into Flyte workflows. And then as a third stage to kind of move forward, so we transferred all of the legacy models into Flyte workflows. We then created a demo workflow for the modelers to kind of work off of, and so that they have an example of all the different things we can do with Flyte. And then that way we can implement all of our new batch inference processes on Flyte. So what's great now is that every single new model that comes out, that is being done on Flyte. And it's really exciting to be like working with the modelers and having them write their own workflows and their own launchpads. They're becoming more and more self-sufficient every single release. And so, we've been on Flyte now for a couple of months. And so we can talk a little bit about what are the advantages, like what have we seen? I would say 2 things. Flyte's giving us additional flexibility, and it's also given us additional savings. So, we can maintain the legacy workflows that we had on Airflow that were so dependent on EMR and Spark. And I don't know if anybody else is working a lot with EMR, but it's very pricey. So we reduced our dependency on EMR a lot here. And I think that, that saves us a lot in terms of, and I'll illustrate that in a minute. But some other things that we really, really like about working with Flyte is this project and domain separation, so that we can have, environment-based resource allocation and just configuration, isolation. Just having that in our new environment allows us a lot of flexibility in terms of testing new workflows, as well as being really controlled over the types of resources that we're using. Because before, when we're on Airflow and EMR, we're kind of provisioning just one big Spark cluster to do all of the work. Whereas now we can allocate resources on a task basis, right? So being, I highlighted it here as task-based resource allocation, that's pretty big for us, because we may have some pretty lightweight tasks that don't require a lot of memory. And there may be one task where, okay, hey, we need a lot more for this one. We're running those types of workloads very efficiently now. And then in terms of the workflow and image versioning, it's really helpful for us to be able to identify not just what workflow ran when, but then we can also go back and trace to which image we were running for that particular workflow. And then with a lot of the testing and the iteration that we do, caching really saves us time. And so we can see a lot of savings there as well. And then, of course, the type checking, which is something that didn't exist before in the Airflow workflows. It's helping us a lot now as we're evolving those workflows and ensuring that changes as they happen. We're not introducing any bugs unintentionally. So it's helping us with a lot of that there. And so when I say, okay, it's saving us time and money, we looked at a couple of different things, right? So our provision time, just like getting an EMR cluster, for example, takes quite a bit of time. So it's at least 2 times faster on average when we, ran these comparisons for what we would say is a typical batch inference model that we're running at least daily. And then the model execution time, much faster. We had it 3 times faster, and the cost, which we can actually probably further optimize. This is with probably minimal configuration and optimization, is at least 3 times cheaper. So this is for a job that we run regularly. And so as you can imagine, that $5 savings per run, it really adds up over time.
So Katrina, if I might ask you a question about that. So that doesn't factor in right now the caching, and doesn't factor in, the provisioning of your resources on a task level. That would come in addition to the savings that you just mentioned here, right?
That's correct. Yes. And so over time, we're expecting to save even more.
Fantastic. Thanks.
It's really helpful that Flyte has caching and is aware of the data sets that it's moving back and forth. That's going to be a big part of our next iteration of optimization. So one of the things I'll talk a little bit more now is some of the challenges that we had in setting up Flyte and implementing it at Stash. And so, like I mentioned before, one of the unique things that is about our particular deployment is that we're running our self-managed Kubernetes on AWS. And so we have our own, we're not basically means that we're not using EKS, right? And then we also have our own proxy, and as well as our own deployment process. And so in order for us to deploy or update any manifests, we have to run the Helm template generation process ourselves. And we have a set of scripts that we use to apply like our organization specific overrides, additions, some annotations and labels that are required by our infrastructure, specific to how we've set things up, especially configuring ingress and gRPC. That was something that was took a little bit of time for us because we didn't have any other applications that were running using gRPC. So we were actually kind of the first in our organization to do so. And then we also have a tool called Spinnaker, which helps us with manifest versioning and deployment. And so it helps us securely deploy as well as roll back. So we can easily sort of test upgrades and updates. And, because we are running our own Kubernetes cluster, there's a lot more tweaking that we have to do. So being able to manage those manifest versions and being to roll back to a specific version of the manifest has been really helpful for us. And so, this is one of the things that we're trying to maybe look forward in the next couple of months to kind of help write some more documentation, contribute more documentation in Flyte for folks who are doing these installations on self-managed clusters. And then so the next challenge I wanted to bring up just briefly, I know I don't have a lot more time, but is CI/CD. And so this is something that is just, honestly, it's an evolving process. But right now, what we've been able to configure is that the platform team, so my team, we develop and we publish base images for the modelers so that they have something to work off of. And then we also provide them GitHub Action and custom runners for those to build those images for their workflows. And so the way that works is that we have feature branches. Those get merged into domain-based branches. So for every domain that we have a branch that is named the same way. And in that GitHub Action, we have those environment variables that get set in the image based off of those domains. And you can see I threw some pseudocode there on the right. And one of the ways that we are able to track all of the different versions of the images and the workflows, we tag all of the workflows with the commit hash so that we can always go back to see when an image was built, why, et cetera. And so this is something that is still an evolving process. We're still working on it. And I think this is something we probably look to the community to kind of help build best practices around. So definitely let me know if you have any sort of suggestions on ways that you guys have been using Flyte in your continuous integration environment. And, we can probably adapt some of those best practices that you've learned. And then finally, I just want to kind of throw in, I know that just kind of talk a little bit about what we're excited, but I think I heard somebody had a question.
No, I was just about saying so Slack is the right channel to continue that CI/CD conversation, and I feel like we just kind of follow up there and take the conversation on there. So this is a really good topic, and we love to provide feedback from people who have faced the same challenges and came up with best practices.
Great, yeah, thanks. So some of the things that we're excited, we are just starting to use the PyTorch integration. We're trying to leverage more container tasks as folks are uncovering the flexibility and being able to write their training jobs in any language, as well as leveraging GPUs, because that's something they didn't have access to before we were moving into the Kubernetes space. And then finally, I know we talked a little bit about it earlier, a little plug for the MLflow plugin. I know that's something that we are pretty excited about. We were looking at it. So hopefully we started actually implementing MLflow very recently. And so whatever we can do to help with that MLflow integration, that looks like it's in the works. We're really excited for that. And then finally, because there's a Scala DSL, and that's a lot of our Stash's backend engineering teams are Scala devs, we're, I think what we'd be excited to do is open this platform up to the rest of the organization and allow them to execute other workflows or trigger workflows from our other backend applications. So that's some of the things that we're super excited about. And that's it.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much, Katrina. This is like a wealth of knowledge and insights. And I feel like if there are any questions here with the audience, feel free. So we have a little bit of time to ask questions, or we can also follow up in Slack and see if there are any questions right now. If not, I do.
Hey, Katrina, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your presentation. I'm just curious what the I like asking this in different contexts, but how was like the strong typing opinion of Flyte received by the workflow authors? people who like data scientists or
Yes.
ML? Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious how
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
It's been, I won't say it's not been challenging. So I think that it was really a little bit confusing. I say really, but it was a little confusing at first because I was pushing for this so strongly as one of the reasons why we need to move to Flyte, just because in my previous organizations and my experience, we have accidentally introduced so many bugs due to not having this, right? Passing the wrong data type, passing the wrong data frame. These are things that are just so easy. They can go to production so easily, right? But there was a bit of a learning curve there. And I think we're still learning here because, you know, the types of things that we can pass, right? Like, you know, there's some limitations, for example, on not being able to pass really large lists, for example, right? And so, you know, having to, you know, either change the types that we're passing or instructing folks to like use, you know, Flyte file instead of passing a list, right? So there are still learnings there, and we're trying to kind of come up with a pattern for them to use so that you can say, oh, when I want to do this, I should do this, and it's safe because why, you know, so.
Awesome, cool. Yeah,
and I show them your talk.
I'll follow up later, but yeah.
I show them your talk on Pandora to kind of just sell it, so.
Nice.
Quick question about your guys' Spark setup. Are you using client mode Spark or are you using cluster mode Spark with Spark Operator? Because we're
using Spark Operator.
Cool. Okay. And how's your experience been about running that on, you know, like self-managed cluster?
It's definitely been a challenge. So I won't say that it's not been a lot of overhead. It has been both just from, you know, managing Spark on Kubernetes in and of itself, I think is like a whole, like, it's not necessarily related to Flyte. It is a challenge, but I think that it is one that is worth it. And we're looking into things that can help us, and some services that can help us. You know, a lot of the savings that we're seeing is also from being able to run a lot of these instances on spot instances. So, and the tuning is different, right? Because you have to set the tuning in your Spark job as well as in your in my Flyte manifest, or in your tasks, right? So in your task, you're requesting specific memory, which is a little bit different when you ask Spark to ask for memory, right? So there's been a bit of a learning curve there.
So Katrina, I really like your approach to the migration. How did you decide on that approach?
Well, we tried to think about what made sense for our organization and our size, as well as the roles and the teams that we had, right? So a lot of that is based off of how we are organized as a company, so that, you know, we have an ML algorithms team, we have an ML platform team, we also have like a DevOps team that's responsible for managing the Kubernetes clusters, like our shared Kubernetes clusters. So a lot of that came from that team structure. So that's sort of where we started with, and sort of kind of went through that process to say, hey, what makes sense to be as least disruptive to the other teams while also providing value?
I mean, it's fantastic. And I feel like many other teams are in the same situation. Some have a different organization, different structure. They probably need a different approach. Some are much more research heavy, some are much more engineering heavy. And so it's always who's leading that initiative. But it would be fantastic potentially to see if we can get a little bit of a write-up about your recommendations about how to do migrations, you know, maybe 1 or 2 rules. I love, you know, how you structured it. It's really fantastic. Okay, cool. So I think I just want to say thanks. Really, really interesting and amazing presentation, Katrina. And obviously, we're going to follow up and learn more about what's happening, and obviously see how you are going to use MLflow with integration, and see if you can use UnitML with MLflow and so on. So that's going to be a couple of questions where we want to see what's happening. So just want to say thanks.